Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first Advocacy Camp. I'm Janae Chin, and I'm chair of the APTA Washington Legislative Committee. We hope that with today, you learn what is advocacy, why is it important, and how we can advance our profession with it. So what we'll talk about today will also help prepare you for Legislative Impact Day, where PTs, PTAs, and students meet with legislators at the Capitol to talk about our profession. So I also like to shout out Green River College. I like how you guys put your to SPTA and where you're from. And thank you, Anna, for championing the people to come today. So we have a great line of speakers joining us this afternoon. And our first speaker will be the APTA Washington President, Ben Boyle.
Thanks, Janae, and hello everyone. For those that I haven't met, and I'm sure there's quite a few of them on the call today. I'm APTA Washington President Ben Boyle. Sorry, I was thinking about, and thank you, Janae, for taking over my long time position as Ledge Chair. You've done an awesome job over the last year and a half, so keep up the great work in that regard. I just have a few, I guess, introductory remarks, and we'll get on with the program. But I think this is just a really great opportunity for everyone to kind of connect and learn from each other and hear from each other. And ultimately, I know if anyone was at the conference this weekend, Roger Herr talked a lot about how the true value of membership really isn't transactional. And I think that that's something that we get lost in from time to time is, what can membership do for me? What kind of education can I provide? And it certainly does a great job of that. But really the true value of the membership is the connectiveness that brings between the members of kind of all aspects of the profession. It's that connectiveness, that web that we're able to create through sharing stories, dialogue, discussion. It's that web that it creates is what allows us to either get something that we want or need individually as a professional, as well as creates the leverage and kind of movement that we need to move the profession in the direction that we want to collectively. And that's really the heart of advocacy. It's not nearly as intimidating as you think, as we'll have a great lineup of speakers today, including Representative Macri, who's been a long-term champion for us. But really, advocacy is about sharing your stories and sharing your experience, being able to connect your experience and your story with things that are going on in the community, being able to connect your story with decision makers in power, whether that be a legislative person, whether that be a community activist. That's really what it's all comes down to is really just being able to connect with one another, have that dialogue, create that dialogue, and then really share your story. And I think that's the heart of what we're going to learn today. And hopefully in doing so, we're more upfront with those stories, sharing those stories with our patients, our clinicians, the decision makers in our communities, and by being more comfortable and upfront with those stories, I think is really the true opportunity to kind of move the profession and us as professionals in the direction that we want. So
next up, we have our lobbyist, Melissa Johnson, and she's going to talk to us about the role of advocacy and how it shapes health profession law and policy.
Good morning. Thank you for having me speak on the role of advocacy in shaping health policy. Advocacy is the key to a successful legislative strategy, and it's important to have the tools to do this effectively. I know there is a general aversion to politics for most people. Politics, in the worst sense of the word, is the fight between political parties and elected officials that we hear or read about. And in an election year, it's even worse. But I want you to think about the state legislature in a different way. In many cases, the state legislature doesn't fit that negative connotation of politics. State legislators are not full-time legislators. Most have other jobs during the time that the legislature is not in session. They run for office because of a spirit of public service. They want to serve their communities and their constituents. It's a hard job that they don't get paid very much to do. And the fact is that legislators have immense control over your practice. They determine your scope of practice and other providers' scope. They control some parts of insurance reimbursement. Overall, they control the health policy of our state. So if you care about your scope of practice, how you practice, your insurance reimbursement, you must care about the legislative process. So why should you care about the legislative process in the upcoming session in 2023? We will have two issues before the legislature next session, dry needling and our corporations bill. Sometimes our issues are very specific, like the dry needling bill. You may think, I have never done dry needling. I don't ever plan to. Why should I engage in this issue? You should engage on this issue to support your fellow PT colleagues who do want to do dry needling. You should support the idea that physical therapists should be able to do all treatments and techniques that you are educated and trained in. And you should engage and support this issue because you will want your profession behind you when it's your particular treatment or technique that's on the line. For the corporations legislation, you should care about this bill because it will give autonomy to physical therapists and physical therapist assistants to practice how they want with other healthcare providers. So the key to advocacy is relationships. Advocacy is not rocket science. At its foundation, it's all about relationships. Relationships with legislators, state agencies, and other healthcare provider groups, and patients. And you know this from your own life and work. The better you know your patient, the better that you can treat them. So it's important to step back and look at the branches of our state government. So we have the executive branch, which of course is the governor, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And within the legislative branch, there are 49 legislative districts. Each district has 1 senator and 2 representatives. And the legislative branch and the executive branch are the 2 branches that APTA Washington deals with the most. So in the state Senate, it's important to know some of the specifics. In the state Senate, Democrats hold a majority, 28-21, and Senator Andy Billig is the majority leader. So he is the leader of the entire Senate. He comes from Spokane and is a Democrat. In the state House of Representatives, Democrats hold a 57-41 majority, and the Speaker of the House is Lori Jenkins. Speaker Jenkins used to sit on the healthcare committee. She is a public health advocate and as her day job works for Tacoma Pierce County Public Health. And APTA Washington has a key relationship with her through her advocacy and negotiations on the spinal manipulation bill several years ago. So your role in advocacy, you have things to bring to the table. You may not realize this, but you do. First, you are that legislator's constituent. You are a voter in their district, and they are elected to listen to their constituents. A legislator from Spokane doesn't want to hear from someone in Seattle. They want to hear from someone in their own district, and they want to know how that bill affects their district and their constituents. So in order to be effective in our advocacy, we need to present the data and the policy arguments for passing our bills, but we can't stop there. We need your voice to put our bills in context. And so legislators need to see the story behind the bill. Why is the bill necessary? What problems are we trying to solve? Your advocacy role is not to be the expert in a particular area. I don't want you to be a mini lobbyist. Your role is to tell your story as to why that bill is important to you, and more importantly, to your patients. That's the voice that you have. You have a unique story about why you're pursuing physical therapy as a profession, what your practice is like, the types of patients you serve. So for example, on the dry needling legislation, we like to have physical therapists like Ben who have practiced dry needling in another state, and they move here and a tool is taken away from them that has been very useful to their patient practice in other states. So that is a very compelling story that we need to share with our lawmakers, because it sets Washington at a disadvantage to other states' patients. The ways to advocate are many, and we provide you these opportunities, and we try to make it as easy as possible to give you the information that you need in order to be an effective advocate. District town hall meetings are one opportunity that we have before the legislative session begins to engage with your lawmakers. And we are planning those right now. They'll be held over the next couple of months. And our virtual meetings, wanting at the highest amount of participation we can through those virtual meetings. And we invite both our APTA Washington members in those districts and the corresponding legislators that are in those districts to come and hear about our legislative agenda before they go to work in January. So that's one way. So watch out for those district town hall invitations to come out very soon. The second way is our Legislative Impact Day. Next year will be January 26th, and we're bringing it back in person. We've had virtual the last couple of sessions, which has been a challenge, and we are very excited to bring it back to an in-person Legislative Impact Day. So mark your calendars for that. And those days, that's an important day because legislators are doing the work. They're contemplating bills, they're voting on bills. And so we want to make sure that we show them that we know we need to connect with them during that legislative session in Olympia while they're doing their work. And the third way are the calls to action that we send out. These are extremely important tools for us to use during the legislative session. These are requests for you to email your lawmakers on our bills. We send these calls out at key times during the session, typically when our bill is going to be voted on. And this is the tool that generates the volume of emails we need to show for support for our bills. It's a canned message, it's a couple of clicks, and then your email goes to your lawmaker. And so we need to make sure that that our members are answering these calls to action, because we know if we have opposition, like we do on our dry needling bill, we know the opposition is using their calls to action as well. And we need to make sure that we are doing everything we can. It is the most simple way that you can advocate during the legislative session on our priority legislative items. And staying informed, obviously, is an important part of being an effective advocate. So the first step is to know who your legislators are. And they might change from this year because legislative redistricting has happened. So district boundaries will change on January 1st. So the people that you're voting for in November might be different names than you've seen in the past. And it's also so important to know who your legislators are. What committees are they on? Are they on a healthcare committee? Are they on a budget committee? Are they in leadership? And then research their biographies. Are they in a community group that you also belong to? The information on the legislative website will give you all of their background, their backstory, and it's always so important to just read those and look for any connection that you might have with your legislator. And all of these factors determine how best to approach them. And the legislature's district finder shown here is where you can start. You put in your home address and it'll pop up your 3 lawmakers and links to their home pages. And the next step is to meet or email your legislator to let them know that you're a constituent and tell them what's happening in their district. So you can do this on your own as a welcome back to the legislature. You can wait for our calls to action, but email is really a very quick and easy way to have that first connection with your lawmaker. And then again, tell your story. Why did you go into this field? How has your practice changed? How has your education changed over the last 2 years? Legislators want to hear from you. And then finally, we at APTA Washington want you to have the up-to-date information. So every week during session, we send out our Capitol News update so that you know exactly what's been happening on our bills and other bills of interest that we're watching, and any hearings that are coming up the next week. You can watch committee hearings and floor action on TVW, either live or after the fact. And again, the legislature's website has all the information you need on your legislators, bills, and committee meetings. So that is the end of my presentation. So I'll kick it back, I think, to Janae.
Melissa, I just had a quick question. I think one of the few good things that came out of the pandemic is that testimony on bills is now remote. And
Yes.
not only is the testimony itself remote, but it's my understanding that we can sign in support remotely as well. Is that correct?
That is
Yeah,
correct.
so I think that's just a huge opportunity for large organizations such as students and people that represent large organizations like myself and Jonathan to really leverage not only our classmates, but the people that we're in contact for to really sign in and support those hearings. And trust me, they're counting the number of people that do this. And it used to be that you had to go into Olympia to do that, but now we can do it remotely. So I think it's a huge opportunity for us to really leverage our numbers in that regard. But I know many of us will not know how to do that. You mind taking us through a quick rundown of where to look? I'm sure we'll update people as it gets closer, but kind of how we go about that.
Right. So when our bills are up for a hearing, there will be a link that we will send out to our membership. And it's a link to register whether you want to testify or whether you just want to sign in. And so for the most part, for you all, it will be signing in support. And so it's a link that you fill in your name and other information, and whether you're pro or con, and whether you are just signing in support or whether you want to testify. Groups, I had bills last session where, upwards of 2,000 people signed in on bills. And it's a very easy way to show the support or the opposition to a bill. And the committee chairs will typically announce what that count is during the hearing. And that influences the committee members. If we have several thousand people signing in support of dry needling, that's a huge amount. Like, they will take notice of that. If we have 30 and the opposition has 500, again, that's a message that we're not advocating as strongly as we need to be.
Thank you, Melissa and Ben, for all your passion and expertise. You all have a chance to talk with them in a breakout room later, so hopefully you have some questions for them then. So now I'm going to introduce our Federal Affairs Liaison, Jonathan Hook, and he's going to join us for a panel discussion about how state and federal advocacy are a little different and sometimes the same. So Jonathan, you want to talk about your role a little bit?
Thanks, Janae. Yeah, my name's Jonathan Hook. I'm at Whitworth University. Shout out to the Bucks that are on screen right now. Go Bucks. Director of Clinical Education. I've been an outpatient physical therapist, private practice for about 14 years now. And yeah, I've loved being in the federal affairs role. Been excited to learn from everyone on this call, constant state of learning, and just want to talk about how federal bills and policy can impact us as well, and how to be an advocate in that sense. I'm going to give you a little review, just like Melissa. If you want a fantastic review, y'all familiar with Schoolhouse Rock? Show of hands if you were born prior to 1985. Not going to be many hands on here, I bet. Yeah. I've seen some vintage t-shirts of Schoolhouse Rock out there, but beyond that, yeah, YouTube Schoolhouse Rock. There's a couple great summaries on YouTube on how bills are created and become laws. So how does it work? Just a quick review. We have different branches of government: legislative, judicial, executive, and really for physical therapy, APTA helps us tremendously and works frequently with the legislative side, meaning the House and Senate, and then also that executive side in terms of, or in the form of the regulatory side. So as a review, we got 435 members in the House. This varies by population in the state, and then 100 members in the Senate. So we have 2 senators per state. And then in that regulatory side, the example that I'm going to give is going to be from the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS. So Washington State, on the congressional side, we do have, for representatives, we have 10 districts. So you can see right there on the map of Washington. In Spokane, we're in the 5th And here are all our representatives right here in each district, 1 through 10. And our senators, Senator Murray and Senator Cantwell. And just like Melissa talked about, one of the best things you can do is find out where you're at on the map. So you can go to Washington State Legislator District Finder, put in your address, and then it'll pop up, and then you'll see those different representatives both at the state level and at the congressional level. So you can see for me here, senators obviously are the same for everyone, and Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers is my representative. So federally, what you'll see is there, again, what Janae talked about, there's some similarities and there's obvious differences. So the big difference, we're looking at policy or programs that are federally funded, Medicare being a huge one, right? So you guys are familiar with Medicare. Once you're a provider, you'll probably be even more familiar with Medicare. It will vary in terms of your patient population, probably in terms of your clinical practice, but these are people that are over 65, potentially younger people with disabilities. There's some other variables that if you qualify for this program, but you can see huge funding source in terms of our federal health insurance program. So example of how this impacts us as a profession is each year, Medicare comes out with this physician fee schedule, a proposed rule that they introduce in the summer. So you can see on this little timeline, July 29th of this summer, 2022, Medicare or CMS came out with a 2,000-page physician fee schedule proposed rule. And once that came out, our APTA came out and read everything and then gave us some comments in terms of what they saw. A big thing they saw, which we see every year, is cuts in the conversion factor, which basically the conversion factor talks about payment for us or reimbursement. So this year they came out with a conversion factor. We saw a reduction in 4.42% in that number. So this, at first glance, you might think, oh, that's not that much, 4%. Well, when you're looking at every single patient in your practice, every single payment of those services provided, that's looking like reimbursement or rates paid by Medicare that's dropping close to those early 1990 levels. So really significant. So after July, there's this stretch where CMS or Medicare gives us an opportunity to provide comments to this 2,000-page document. So APTA will provide comments, just like Melissa and Ben and Janae have talked about. This is where we can jump in as advocates of our profession as well, where we can provide comments and what they want to hear. And they've talked about this. Medicare, this huge organization, even in their comments, they say, we want to hear your story. We want to hear how this is directly impacting your profession, impacting your patients. So this is our first strategy in terms of advocacy. So we submit these letters. This closes at September. It closed September 6th. And then, unfortunately, what often happens is Medicare looks at those comments and says, we hear you, however, we're maintaining our 4.42% cut because they need to balance their budget, basically. We can't spend more than we have. So next step, September 13th, a bill's introduced. And that goes back to that first slide. So we had this introduction of the Supporting Medicare Providers Act of 2022. This was introduced by Representative Vera in California and Representative Bouchon, MD in Indiana. This was introduced in the House. This is a bipartisan legislation. And basically the bill said, we need to boost this 2023 conversion factor by 4.42%. And so offsetting that cost. So again, this once again opens up this opportunity for us to advocate and to see this bill through kind of the legislative process. This has been introduced in committee, and I'll show you a slide next on what that looks like. But it's yet to go to the House floor for a vote. And you know from that first slide that has to pass in the House, has to pass in the Senate before it moves to the president to sign to become law. So this is where it's vital for us to talk to our representatives. And this is, this next slide, that you have different levels of opportunities for advocacy. One, if you're an APTA member, if you join that advocacy network, just like Melissa talked about, you have the opportunity to write letters to these representatives, to your senators, and talk to them again about your story and how this directly impacts your practice and impacts our patients. Then there's these other opportunities that we're excited for you guys to be involved with very soon as well. You can become a key contact, and that's those individuals that I'm working with as the Federal Affairs Liaison to directly meet with representatives, with legislators, and talk about these bills that are impacting our profession. So this is my good friend now, Bob Paul. This is a legend of Bob Paul, who is he is kind of like the godfather of physical therapy in the state of Washington, and just a fantastic gentleman who's retired now, but still is passionate about the physical therapy profession and about advocacy. And so this is Bob and I, when we went on Capitol Hill Day a couple summers ago, and we talked to legislators in Washington, D.C. about similar laws that were impacting us at that time. This is your other advocacy efforts that Melissa was talking about. This is an example of a letter that basically is drafted by APTA. They equip us well to be able to engage with representatives. And so you just have to add a few things and then write in a little bit about your story. And then this goes out with the goal of, again, gaining numbers of representatives, of legislators who are supporting these bills that are impacting our profession. One of my favorite quotes, right? So this is where, I mean, you guys, you're equipped. We're going to make sure you have the information, and you just got to get beyond that fear of like, I don't know what to do, and it's going to take so much time. And what if, all these things that we're hoping that this time here equips you with the information and the confidence to be able to engage and to get beyond that fear to the dark side being doing nothing, not being an advocate. That's the dark side. And then the path of this bill. So in this case, this bill, we talked about that process of summer, of comments, of bill introduction in September, and then this opportunity for us to talk to our representatives. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with Bob Paul again and Dan Anton at EWU and some of the Eastern students, and we're talking with Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers and her office, again, specifically about this bill and some other bills. And in the hope that you can see down here, it's been introduced. We need it to move into the House, to pass the House, move into the Senate, pass the Senate. And this is all before January 1st. And this is again, something that we've had to do each year. There's thousands of letters that were sent last year that helped meet that deficit and get us over the finish line to negate that conversion factor that Medicare proposed last year as well. So this is where we need everyone's voice. So that's just one example federally. Another one that we can talk about in the breakout is that you guys are going to be passionate about is this Physical Therapist Workforce and Patient Access Act. So this is adding PTs. This is adding you all to National Health Service Corps, which there's this loan reimbursement payment program that pays up to $50,000 in student loans working in rural health locations and possible shortages. So this was part of our flash action strategy in September. And this is another example federally of an area you guys could immediately have massive impact, because probably don't even need to ask for show of hands how many are going to be impacted by student debt when you're done with PT school. probably a couple of people on this call. So there's another area just federally that that your voice matters, just like everyone's been talking about. So thanks. Yeah, that's Janae. That is what I have.
Yeah, Jonathan, thank you. I also, just as a way to kind of tie in the Medicare conversion factor is so overwhelming, but I think it's also important that it not only apply, it's not only important for Medicare, right? The conversion factor that Medicare sets is also the baseline that most of your commercial payers and most of your state payer contracts also utilize. So, if we're looking at how kind of federal links to how you operate and behave and get paid in the state, a lot of it, the vast majority of our kind of commercial contracts utilize the percentage of the Medicare conversion factor as how they determine payment within the state.
Yeah.
So every year that they drop that 4.42% also drops your commercial contracts 4.42%, unless you're having an astute enough contracting person to pick a year where it was good for us. But most of the time they're tied to the current CMS rate. So I think it's important to not just kind of focus locally, but also understand that, especially with CMS actions, it often will filter down to you very quickly.
Yeah, great point.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. And again, if you have questions, don't feel free to drop them in the chat, and you'll see Jonathan in the breakout rooms later. We are going to talk a little bit about some state bills now. So we've talked about what's going on nationally for APTA, all of APTA. Now we'll just talk about APTA Washington. So then, Melissa, I think we're going to talk about the spinal manipulation bill and some of our other bills that we've introduced in the past.
Yeah, that sounds great. Melissa, you are more heavily involved in spinal manipulation than I was. I joined the state, I guess, when it was first introduced, but certainly that was a hard-won fight that we have among others. I think it's rare. I just want to say it's rare to be in a state or be practicing in a state where an association has this many legislative wins this frequently. I think it's a testament to our leaders that have worked hard on it, as well as the advocacy efforts that we've had in the past. So I think it's not common to have that many legislative wins as frequently as we have. So
yeah, so Ben, I can, when I was looking over, what we've looked at and advocated for, and as you say, the legislative wins, the spinal manipulation one, it dates back for me to 1996. That was the first year, and I've been lobbying with you, since about that time. That bill was introduced to remove the prohibition of spinal manipulation, and of course, it was passed in 2014. So that's a lot of time, and an interesting, stories along the way. The most significant was that there was a chiropractor in the legislature for much of that time. And because of some of the things that he did and supported while he was a Republican, the Democrats who were in charge basically needed his vote on many things. And so whatever his name was Tom Campbell, whatever he wanted, he got. And he did not want this bill. So he was able, for that length of time, until he was voted out of the legislature, he was able to stop that legislation. And so, that's, again, and we are kind of experienced that again with our dry needling bill with Representative Cody, that shows, the politics behind some of these issues, because we were one of two states that had a prohibition on spinal manipulation. So first in 1996 and 2014 was when we passed it. And after Representative Campbell left the legislature or was not reelected, we had to go into some intense negotiations with the Chiropractic Association to get the language that eventually passed the legislature. Some of the other bills, I don't know, Ben, do you want me to talk about?
No, I just think that I think the spinal manipulation one is a good example of facts are not always at play in these sort of negotiations. I think too often we we try as PTs, because of our science-minded brains, try to kind of make advocacy arguments on facts and figures and the science behind things. But I think the spinal manipulation one was a great example of that's really not in play. It really is an emotional, it's an emotional argument. And I think that that's where we kind of have to be able to play. We have to understand that when we're negotiating those type of deals is it's really does come down to the stories really that influences the members versus trying to state facts and figures and everything like that. And I certainly learned that through the dry needling process as well. It started out with, long-winded spiel about how it worked and yada, yada, yada. Now I've cut it down to it takes care of pain. So I certainly learned that as well, and then throw some stories about how that works. The other one is, I think it's really important that we learn how to read legislation or how to read those bills. I think the spinal manipulation one is a great example of that. It's on the face, it appears very daunting and complicated, but I think it's important. But when you actually read it and pay attention to where, the commas and the periods and the and/ors are, it's really much more achievable than it looks on the surface. And that was really the people who wrote that. I know we have some of them on the call that was really underappreciated thing that they did, because on the surface it looks so complicated, and I know they took a lot of flack for it, but it really was a take it or leave it deal. But they managed to write it in such a way that it's not nearly as prohibitive as it for the PTs as it looks, but was able to assuage the concerns of the chiropractors. So I think it's important to make sure that we learn and understand how writing legislation are able to read those and interpret them. So I think that's a great educational opportunity for people.
And I'm not sure how much other states had prohibited spinal manipulation in the past too. I also want to talk about how the difference of state practice acts are for each and every state too, such as Washington, we have the spinal manipulation endorsement. I know other states, you're just, once you're done with school, you're able to do it. No questions asked. And it's also with dry needling too. So I think 45 other states allow PTs to do dry needling, but ours is one of the few that doesn't. So it does bring a lot of frustrations for people who come in and out of the state. So not all bills take that long. I want to say the dry needling one has been 7 years now, Ben?
14 to 2, yeah. 7, 8. Yeah.
7, 8 years. And there's some that I think have only taken 1 year, such as like the prior auth, right? So we have a little bit of time if you want to talk about the shorter bills and how that was, I believe, the Medicare therapy cap.
Yeah, so I'll start with so one, and it's kind of deceptive when you say it only takes 1 year. It's one legislative session, and the PT assistant licensure bill is one that is that kind of deceptive, because it did take just one session for that bill to pass. But there was a lot of work within the association leading up to that point, just getting everyone on board with that policy. So while the bill only took 1 year, the work behind it was many years, and a lot of work from people that are on this call. And typically, if it's a 1 year, the licensure compact bill was another one that took 1 year, and it was because there was no opposition. Once you have a bill that has opposition, you are likely looking at a multiple year, because legislators don't like that. They don't want two groups to be fighting. They want us to work it out and come back with an agreed upon bill. And sometimes that's just not achievable. So the compact and the PTA licensure bill were so narrowly focused on our own profession that no other group cared about it. We were left to our own devices, and we were able to push those bills through.
Yeah, and I mean, and just going back to, I think the dry needling bill is just a really, on how 40 of the 5 other states got it. I think it's just a really good, the historical is good exercise in kind of understanding how these come about. So it wasn't always specifically prohibited in Washington. That's why we have some people in the state that have dry needling patients and such forth. But I think if you go back to 2013, I think was the Salmon Bay case where kind of a local district judge ruled against Salmon Bay physical therapy, and that ruling was binding just to them. They happened just to host a course, and that was a pretty unfortunate outcome for them. But it was only binding to those people. So, and if dry needling continued, and I think that's where Representative Cody kind of jumped in on. Not happy about dry needling continued. And so I think this is where she asked for her Attorney General opinion, which is, oftentimes in statutes or scope of practice where the scope is silent, as it was with dry needling, a legislator will often use an Attorney General opinion to determine if that should remain silent or if this is actually kind of in violation of the scope of practice. And I think typically, if you look across the country, not everything was codified in law and state practice acts regarding to dry needling. A lot of it was Attorney General opinions or board interpretive decisions. So I think there's a really, I have to tip my, frustrating as hell, but I had to tip my cap to Cody. She generally, when you ask for Attorney General opinions related to dry needling, they focused on 2 different things. It was basically, could this be in the physical therapy scope of practice, or is this acupuncture, right? So those are kind of the 2 things that successful Attorney General opinions were based on, on the past. I think what Cody did different was that she said, is dry needling currently in the legislative scope of practice for physical therapy? And what that did is, before in previous states, the removal of currently, or the omission of currently, allowed the Attorney General to basically make an interpretive opinion around, yes, it makes sense, you're utilizing a needle as an extension of your hand, you do have EMG in your state practice act, et cetera, so therefore it probably could and should be allowed under the current physical therapy scope of practice. With the code, by adding currently, it forced the Attorney General to make a black and white reading of it. Basically, is it there or is it not? Since it is not, and it currently been silent, that's when kind of dry needling in Washington was formally shut down. And we had to kind of then go through the multi-year process that included a sunrise review, which is a scenario where the Department of Health creates that unbiased, quote, allegedly unbiased panel, and both sides kind of provide testimony and argument against. Department of Health researches it and compiles a report on whether or not this could be part of a scope of practice, or it meets the guidelines for expansion of scope of practice, which, if you're not aware, the 3 guidelines are safety, efficacy, as well as cost effectiveness. Those are, in Washington state, the 3 things that you essentially need to prove to expand your scope of practice. Fortunately for us, the Department of Health said that it could be in the scope of practice, barring 2 different things. First, we needed more training hours, as well as that supervision component. They recommended that we use that U.S. military model. So that's where kind of the baseline of our language for dry needling came about. So then we took that base and worked with multiple stakeholder groups. We went into mediation with East Asian Medical Association. Obviously, we didn't come to a deal, but at the same time, we were able to take a lot of things from that negotiation and then add them into our bill. So now we've been able to go through over the years to multiple legislators and key stakeholders and really tell that story, how we went through that process, how we negotiated in good faith. And the end result of it is, even though we haven't had a hearing, we go into this session with incredible support for our bill and significant co-sponsors. So as Janae said, sometimes it looks like it's a year. Sometimes it's, sometimes not being able to get it through in a session is also beneficial. Like, I think if we hadn't done that work going into this session, there'd be a lot more opposition, a lot less understanding. And as Melissa said, people don't like conflict. I think now we're at the point where the legislators understand that we're almost not going to agree, but they know we've done our due diligence in helping, getting to this point. So I think that louder voice that from WIAMO kind of holds less weight than it would have been if we hadn't done all that work over the years to get stakeholder buy-in for our cause. So.
All right, thanks, Ben, for talking about the history of dry needling. Okay, Melissa is going to talk about the upcoming 2022 elections and some of the legislators in the healthcare space.
So knowing your audience obviously is an important part of advocacy. And we have elections coming up in less than 3 weeks. So it's important to know what the elections will kind of bode for us, and to know who the key legislators are, because, in the House we have 98, in the Senate we have 49. We don't need to talk to all of those legislators all of the time. So it's very important for us to know who those key legislators are. All right, next slide, please. All right, so the November elections. I think my ballot I received over the weekend, so hopefully you all have received your ballots as well. Election day is Tuesday, November 8th. And these, while they're midterm elections, meaning this is not a presidential year, we still have lots of state races that will be up for election. The entire House of Representatives, this is again at the state level, is up for re-election. They're on 2-year terms. And half of the Senate is up for re-election. The Senate has 4-year terms, and so half are up this year and half will be up in 2 years. And many legislators are retiring this year. And so those are creating lots of what we call open seats, where there is no incumbent running in that race. And I want to talk a little bit about those retiring. One of the key legislators who's retiring is Representative Eileen Cody, the longtime chair of the House Healthcare Committee. And she has been in office since 1994. She is the longest standing House member that we have, and she will retire at the end of her term in January. And so that has huge implications because there will be a new House healthcare chair. And we lose a lot of her expertise in health policy. I mean, she is the architect of so many things, Cascade Care, the health equity piece. I remember the Blue Ribbon Commission on Healthcare Reform from many years ago. She was instrumental in all of those efforts. Another key retiree we have in the House is Representative Pat Sullivan, who's the majority leader. So his retirement, again, opens up that position for new people to step in. And unfortunately, a lot of the freshman legislators who were elected 2 years ago decided not to seek re-election. And this is just my opinion. I think having a remote session for the last 2 years, I believe, played a large part in that. Those are legislators who never got to come to the Capitol, never got to have an in-person caucus meeting with their colleagues. They didn't have committee meetings, in a committee hearing room. And a lot of that relationship building just wasn't able to happen because of the remote nature of session. And so that's sad, because I think we had some great rising stars in that freshman class who just won't be there next January. All right, next slide. So the House and Senate majorities likely won't change because of the elections. There's enough cushion with the House Democrats in both chambers that the majorities won't switch from Democratic to Republican. So what this means is there's going to be no major change in policy priorities from years past. So that's kind of the good news is that there won't be a lot of changes policy-wise when we convene in January. But there's going to be an impact on redistricting. Every 10 years with the census, the state redraws the legislative and congressional district boundaries. And this happened this year. And there were some significant changes across the state in both Eastern Washington and Western Washington. I know the Seattle legislative district's boundaries moved. So people that were in one district, now the boundaries moved maybe 2 or 3 streets away, and now they're in a completely new district. And same in Eastern Washington, where the districts are larger, they were just changed geographically. So a lot of those lawmakers are now campaigning in areas that they never had to campaign in before. The impact of midterm voter apathy. This is a huge one, again, because we're not in a presidential year where many more people vote. People staying on the sidelines, I think, are losing out on an opportunity for a lot of the state and local elections. And so you're losing your voice if you don't vote in November. And for legislative races, again, at the state level, there are some races that are won and lost by, a couple of hundred votes. And so that's hugely important. In fact, one legislator from 4 years ago, Senator Emily Randall, she won her seat. It was a hugely contested race, and she won her seat by 104 votes. Out of the tens of thousands that were cast. So if anyone ever says to you, my vote doesn't count, it absolutely does at the state and local levels. So stakes are high, and so please, I guess here's my plea to please vote in November. All right, next slide. So there are some legislative districts to watch. The 42nd legislative district is one that is up in Whatcom County. There are 2 representatives and 2 Democratic representatives and 1 Republican senator in that district. And so there are open seats there that will change. And so that's a huge one to be watching for. And then in the 26th district, it's the reverse. There are 2 Republican representatives and 1 Democratic senator. This is Senator Emily Randall's seat as well. So that's another one that's in the Gig Harbor area of our state. So that's one to watch as well. So the election happens, and what's next? So the House and the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, they caucus separately. So they meet separately to elect their leadership. This is called their reorganization. So they elect leadership. So and then they determined the committee chairs. Again, we will have a new committee chair for the House Healthcare Committee. This is something that people the caucus will vote on. And then caucus members also rank their choices for committee assignments. So everyone kind of goes back to the drawing board and puts their top 3 committees on a list. And then the Committee on Committees, which is a thing, then determines which committees a legislator is appointed to. So freshmen typically have the least amount of say in what committees they're on because they have the least seniority. So again, it's important to learn who your new legislators are because of either redistricting or election results, and what committees they're appointed to, because you may have a legislator that was never on healthcare and now may be on healthcare, and that's a good thing. That's an opportunity for us to educate that legislator. I want to say a little bit about the PAC, the Washington Physical Therapy PAC, because this is a huge, valuable tool that the profession has in these election cycles. The PT PAC raises money for contributions to state legislators. So this PAC does not contribute to congressional candidates. That's the National APT Association has a PAC that does that. So our Washington State Physical Therapy PAC is just for state elected officials. And I know many folks are turned off by the talk of contributions, that it's sort of buying a vote. But the reality is that these elections cost money. And to use a sports analogy, with strong advocacy alone, we'll get a ticket to the game, but with strong advocacy and contributions, we'll get uniforms to play on the field. So we're playing in this sport of politics, and contributions are a way that we can both educate new candidates about who we are and what our legislative priorities are, and more importantly, make sure that our supporters, of which we have many, are reelected. We want those folks that have signed on to our dry needling bill, and folks that we have worked with over this summer and fall who are supportive of us. We want them to be reelected, and contributions are just a way of doing that. So as far as key legislators, there are the obvious ones. Healthcare committee chairs. So Senator Annette Cleveland from Vancouver is the Senate Healthcare Chair. We've talked about Representative Eileen Cody as the House Healthcare Committee Chair. So Senator Cleveland, again, knowing we have to know who she is. Her background is in hospital administration. Representative Cody is a rehab nurse, was kind of one of the original staff at Group Health. So she, pros and cons of that. She is a healthcare provider herself and a rehab nurse to boot. So she has some knowledge of our profession. Again, this worked against us in dry needling, but it worked for us in so many other of our issues. And chairs decide, they have a lot of power. They decide what bills are heard in their committee. Because I got this question a lot over the last couple of years. How can Representative Cody hold up our bill? Like, why does she have that much power? And that is the power that a chair has. They determine what bills are heard and they determine what bills will be voted on. And because hundreds of bills will get referred to the healthcare committees each session, and there's not enough time to hear them all. So chairs use, some criteria to decide, what bills will be elevated to that special place of getting a hearing. And some of those criteria are, is there a lot of opposition? Again, legislators don't like that conflict, and chairs don't want to have to spend, an hour on a bill hearing. That's taking up a lot of time. If there's a lot of opposition, a lot of back and forth, they don't want to spend that time. Is there bipartisan support? Have we done our work? Are there Democrats and Republicans as sponsors? Again, an indication that there's support for this bill and that it will have an easy path. And how do they personally feel about the bill? Again, Representative Cody had some history and some personal reasons about dry needling. And that, again, kind of trumped everything else about our bill, even though we had the bipartisan support in sponsors, and we had the votes to get a bill out of her committee should she have given it a hearing. Sometimes it just comes down to they personally don't like it. So some more obvious ones. We can't forget about the ranking members. So each committee has a chair, which is in the majority party, and then there's a ranking member who in the minority party. And so in our legislature right now, since the Republicans are in the minority, those ranking members are Republicans. But they are important members of the committee because we need bipartisan support. So we can't just look at the chair and make sure that the chair is supportive. We need to look at that ranking member too, because they are going to educate their caucus members, their Republican colleagues on that committee as well. So a well thought out advocacy plan, you don't just focus on the party who's in the majority. We need to work together because stronger policy is made if there's bipartisan support. So for this session, and this could change again next January, Representative Joe Schmick is the ranking member of the House Healthcare Committee, and Senator Ron Mazzal is the ranking of the Senate Healthcare Committee. And then we have the members of the committee. For any legislation moving through the healthcare committee, we have to pay attention to the committee members. They're on that committee because they have an interest in health policy, and they're the ones who are going to be voting on the bills. So when we're advocating for a bill and we get to the point where we have to do a vote count of the committee members, so I'm literally going to each member of that committee and asking them, will they support this bill or not? And then I take that vote count to the chair and say, I have unanimous support for this bill on your committee. Please schedule it for a vote. If I can't say that, if it's close or I don't have the votes, then there's more work to be done. So those committee members are obviously very important. And then kind of going up the chain of command, we have the leaders of the House and Senate. So Speaker Lori Jenkins, which I mentioned earlier, she's the leader of the House. Representative J.T. Wilcox is the Republican leader of the House. Again, Senator Andy Billig is the majority leader in the Senate, and Senator John Braun is the Republican leader of the Senate. And these leaders determine the overall policy priorities of their caucus. Again, the majority party kind of runs the table a little bit with their priorities, but the Republican leaders are also very, very important in the process. And so there are some not so obvious ones because we can't just stop at the committee members. We need to get these bills off the House and Senate floor. And so we look to legislators with lived healthcare experience. Examples of this are Representative Shelley Kloba, who's a massage therapist. She's not on the healthcare committee, but she is one of our go-to people when we advocate for physical therapy issues because she worked in a PT clinic and she knows the profession. Legislators who have had physical therapy. I remember when we were doing our scope of practice bill, our Model Practice Act many years ago, we had Representative Dawn Morell, who was on the healthcare committee. She's a nurse. And we had another legislator, Representative Ed Orcutt, who is a logger. He works out in the forest. And they were our co-sponsors, and Representative Orcutt, not someone I would have gone to on a healthcare issue. He had fallen and had a bad injury when he was working, and he credited his physical therapist for getting him back to work and getting him back into his profession. And so he was on board. He came and testified because of that connection with his own physical therapy and his own injury. There's a senator now who recently had a baby and has talked to me about the interest in pelvic floor access. So you never know what that lived experience will be. Legislators with strong constituent connections. Senator Shelley Short, who was a huge supporter of our prior authorization legislation. She was our supporter, again, not on the healthcare committee, but she had both a physical therapist and a chiropractor in her district that were both talking to her about the access problems that they were experiencing and their patients were experiencing in getting PT and chiropractic. And she took those constituent stories and ran with them, and she was our huge supporter in the Senate. And newly elected legislators are great because they don't have their issues set in stone yet. They're kind of a blank canvas that we can, again, get to know them and see how we can fit our issues into something that they're interested in. And our dry needling legislation is a good example of the not so obvious legislators. We have a mix of healthcare committee members and non-healthcare committee members, and it shows that we're doing our work. And so, the bottom line is, we want to talk to as many legislators as we can because you never know when you're going to find your next champion.
All right, thank you, Melissa. We have some time before our next speaker comes up. Representative Nicole Macri is going to join us at 3 o'clock. So does anyone have questions for our lobbyist? Yeah, go ahead and unmute.
Thanks, Janae. Melissa, could you just explain, you did an awesome job regarding all the legislative stuff in that process. It might be nice for many of the students on this call to know the difference between like our chapter and the legislative process, and maybe where the Department of Health falls in this process, because, you know, we have to go through the Department of Health for our licensing and those kinds of things, and just explain that a little bit. That might be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Anna, for the question. So the Department of Health, obviously an arm of the executive branch, and we have the Physical Therapy Licensing Board. So we have a dedicated board that regulates physical therapists and physical therapist assistants. And so typically how they get involved in legislation is the legislature passes a bill, and I'll use the compact bill as an example. Legislature passed the compact bill allowing Washington to join the Physical Therapy Licensure Compact. And it directed the Board of Physical Therapy at the Department of Health to then implement that bill. And so they had to go through some rulemaking and some other kind of organizational implementation with the Compact Commission. They had to elect a representative from that board to the Compact Commission. And so they can't do that on their own. They needed legislative direction in order to do that. But all of that kind of on the ground work happens a lot with the Physical Therapy Licensing Board. Sometimes we try to get them activated. You know, we tried that with spinal manipulation. We tried that, you know, to a lesser extent with dry needling. They are hesitant to get, this board is hesitant to get out in front of the legislature. There has been legislation passed that says they could come and advocate and testify, but they choose not to. Unfortunately, some other boards and commissions are more kind of activist in that way. But they have usually typically monthly meetings that, you know, we participate in, watch that agenda. So if there's any other rulemaking that they're doing that we need to be, you know, weighing in on, that we can do that at that level.
Yeah, I think, Melissa, we don't want to forget those other agencies, because they have also played a huge role. Another big one is the Office of the Insurance Commissioner had a huge role in our health benefit manager bill. Do you want to kind of take us through that one as well? Yeah.
So the Office of the Insurance Commissioner is a little bit different because our insurance commissioner is an elected official. So currently it's Mike Kreidler, and because he's his own elected official, he doesn't have to take direction from the governor. He can basically you know, establish his own health policy. And when we were doing our prior authorization bill, we were able to work with him and his office to get support and advocacy from the Office of the Insurance Commissioner on that bill. And so that was huge to know, to be able to say that we had the OIC support. And then when it passed, then we'd already done so much groundwork that, again, implementing that legislation was much less complicated than it would have been had they just been kind of watching from the sidelines.
You have a question in the chat, Melissa.
Yep. What does the insurance commissioner do in general? So the insurance commissioner has the authority over all of the commercial insurance plans that are distributed throughout the state. So it's not just health insurance, it's property and casualty, it's automobile insurance. There's a whole section of the law that gives the insurance commissioner the authority over all of those products that are sold to consumers in Washington state. There are exceptions. You know, Medicaid is housed under the Healthcare Authority. So that reimbursement goes through the Healthcare Authority. And self-funded plans, such as like Microsoft, Boeing, they have their own kind of insurance product that they sell. Those are outside the purview of the insurance commissioner, but that commissioner has a lot of power over on kind of all of the types of insurance that are regulated or that are sold in Washington.
Melissa, could you talk a little bit about so Medicaid is it's kind of a state fund, but it's really federal money. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Right. So the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, is the federal authority over Medicare and Medicaid. So Medicare is all federal, and so that's of course the insurance product for older Americans. Medicaid is administered through the healthcare authority. It is federal dollars that match state dollars. So it's a combination of federal and state funding for our Medicaid population. So these are Washingtonians who use the Medicaid as their health insurance, either because of disability or income. So our state legislature has nothing to do with Medicare, everything to do with Medicaid, and there is that federal matching component for Medicaid.
Great questions, everybody. Now, any more? Now that Melissa has the floor.
So Melissa, one of the big things that came up in the House of Delegates is this concept of improving access for patients with Medicaid, as well as removing administrative burden. If we were going to go about making changes with the state Medicaid program, would we need to advocate with the healthcare authority, or is this something that would be done through the legislative process? Because some of them would be kind of, I understand payment, maybe not, but some of like policy, for example, being able to utilize more PT extenders, right, would make Medicare treatment for Medicaid beneficiaries more readily available for providers like myself and I know Jonathan, who provide care to Medicaid beneficiaries. But right now it's cost prohibitive for a lot of organizations that do that. So if we were going to try to change policy, make some policy changes, would that go through the healthcare authority, or would that be a legislative thing?
Any policy change would likely go through the legislature, but the healthcare authority, we would work with them, in preparation for any change to get, any current data and get their feedback on how this would change and the fiscal impact. Anything to do with Medicaid is less about the policy and more about the fiscal impact to the state. So if you change reimbursement, if you try to, increase reimbursement, we have to get what's called a fiscal note. And that's something that the healthcare authority would then calculate what the additional funding that would be necessary to implement that reimbursement. And so typically legislators are not opposed to a policy change, but it comes down to the dollars.
Great. We do have a question for Melissa. What is your favorite part of your job as a lobbyist?
That's a great question. And it's hard. I mean, I love things like this. I love talking about advocacy. I love engaging people to be, to advocate, to be better advocates, because I think this is how we advance the profession. I am, the voice of APTA Washington on the ground, but I need all of your help and expertise in doing that successfully. So I love speaking with students, because you're at the forefront. You're, launching into this career. You have a vested interest, obviously, for a robust profession to be waiting for you when you're done with your education. And so and legislators love to listen. They love to hear from students. They think you're not tainted, that you haven't kind of, drunk the Kool-Aid of APTA Washington yet. So they don't know that we do these things behind the scenes. But I think this is my favorite part of the job.
Okay, hope people are feeling refreshed after that little break. And we have Representative Nicole Macri here. Again, thank you again for your time. I'm going to do a little introduction for you. So Nicole Macri was elected to the Washington House of Representatives in 2016, and represents the 43rd Legislative District of Washington, which includes Seattle neighborhoods of Downtown, First Hill, Capitol Hill, Madison Valley, Madison Park, Montlake, U District, Ravenna, Wallingford, Fremont, City Ridge. So she serves as vice chair of the Appropriations Committee and is a member of the Healthcare and Wellness Committee. She is also a co-chair of the Washington State LGBTQ Caucus. Nicole has more than 20 years of experience as a champion of progressive causes on issues in affordable housing, homelessness, human services, behavioral health and healthcare, including reproductive and abortion care. And she has been the forefront of the Housing First movement nationally and is a recognized leader in practical and effective strategies that end the homelessness of people living with serious disabilities. And outside the legislator, Nicole is a deputy director for the Downtown Emergency Service Center in Seattle, where she has worked since 2002. She has championed Seattle's housing levy and is appointed by the City Council to serve successive terms as a member of the Housing Levy Oversight Committee. Nicole was named one of Seattle's most influential people by Seattle Magazine in 2019 and one of the 100 most influential people in Seattle in 2021 by Seattle Met. Nicole holds a Bachelor of Arts from Rutgers University and a Master's of Public Administration from the University of Washington, and completed a certificate in executive leadership at Seattle U's Albert School of Business. She has been a champion of the dry needling legislation and serving as the bill's prime sponsor and lead legislative advocate since 2019. So did I get that all?
Yeah, that was a lot. Thanks, today. Whoa.
Thank you. We're so glad to have you here. So I want to start with a question. And what have you learned the most about your in your position so far?
That's a great question. I mean, I'd say that a few things, but the thing that comes to mind is that anytime you think an issue is simple, it just isn't. I just think of so many times when I have talked with folks about, well, maybe we could just, make this quick fix, this easy fix. And I have found almost never is changing state policy quick or easy or uncontroversial. Sometimes it's uncontroversial, but very rarely. And we certainly have learned that in the work that we have done on dry needling. So that is a big thing. The other thing is, I guess I've learned is just the need to get proficient as a legislator in a broad range of policy topics. And I've actually really enjoyed that. As you spoke about in my bio, I come to the legislature with some deep experience in a couple of different areas, but through my legislative service have become really knowledgeable about a whole range of issues. And I've really tried to focus in a bit on the housing realm, but also more broadly within healthcare, really focusing on expanding access, equitable access to healthcare, which is I think really brought me into partnership with physical therapists in a lot of different policy that you all have prioritized.
So here we have a lot of PT students and PTA students. What's your words of advice for them?
I think it's great that you're here. I think it's awesome that you all are doing this advocacy camp, because I think that learning about how public policy impacts your profession and how public policy, even more relevant, I think, impacts the patients who you're caring for is really essential. And that as healthcare practitioners, you can have a really big influence on public policy and on the care and well-being of the people who you are caring for.
So oftentimes we talk about, we do a lot of email blasts. How do you feel about those mass emails? And do you get to see those?
I do, yes, I do get to see them. It's helpful for me. The kind of things I look for when I get response to a big email blast, or I get a bunch of emails, and it's clearly a blast because the language and the email is similar, is I, number one, like count how many. We organize all the emails we get on specific topics or policy bills, but in individual folders, so we can sort of count them all up. And I routinely reference that when I'm talking with my colleagues. I also look through to see if there are names who I recognize, and will often sort of hone in on those to see if there's like a personalized note in there. And then I will scan or have someone on my team scan to see if in any of them there's any kind of personal note, particularly around kind of real life experiences. So not just the kind of 30,000 foot policy issue, but like, here's an example of why this is important to me. This is what happened, you know, in my office just this week, and why this is relevant to me and why I'm bringing it to you. So yeah, I do look at the blasts, and I think many legislators do.
Great. I know we send a lot. Do you find something that resonates with you most, whether it's like phone calls, you know, scheduling personal meetings, and how do we get about doing that?
Yeah, I'll say it's pretty hard to get me on the phone, and we do log phone calls when they come into our office. But they're, you know, often, especially during session, we're moving so quickly that the most information I'll get from phone calls is like how many people have called, or so-and-so called, you know, and they called on this policy bill or on this issue. And sometimes I'll get a sentence or two specifically, but it's hard to get me kind of on the fly on the phone without a scheduled meeting. So I really like, emails are good because I can reference them. And the other thing I use emails for is like when we're on the floor of the House, I will often look through emails for content that I can use in a floor speech or in combating a bad amendment to a bill. And so those kind of personal stories, I can stand up and say, I just heard from a physical therapist or a physical therapy student in my district who shared with me, you know, this experience with a patient. That is another reason why emails are helpful, or even summary emails after a meeting. I like meetings because it really is a personal touch. And also there's an ability to have a little bit of back and forth. Even if it's in a group context, a lot of meetings I do are in groups. So either in person in Olympia, but now we really are able to do these remote meetings, and we're going into this next legislative session, assuming legislators will be there in person, but there will be opportunities for kind of a hybrid operation. So both with testifying in committee, but also meeting with legislators remotely. And that's good, especially for students who going to Olympia can be an all-day endeavor. You know, it takes, you're coming from Seattle, which is where my district is, you know, it could take an hour and a half or longer, and often much longer to drive home. And so, you know, that you're putting in like 7 hours to meet with your legislator for 15 minutes. So I really like the idea of remote meetings to expand who can participate. And what I like in a remote meetings, I can't, and in part because of the Zoom life that we all have now, it's difficult for me to always kind of put faces to names because we're just seeing everyone in these little squares. But when somebody says, Representative, remember when I came last year, or you came to our event and I met you, or I asked a question, and I think that is really, really helpful. So the other kind of piece of kind of advice for students is like, keep at it. Like, it's a long-term endeavor, and to advocate year after year, I think is really important. And there are always different issues that come up, and so there's always an opportunity to reach out to your legislator.
Oh, thank you for that. Tell me a little bit more about how you got into being a representative.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I always think my path to becoming elected is like an unlikely one. Like I wasn't really seeking out elected office, but there's a lot of people like that actually in elected office who were inspired by a particular issue or a particular incident in their life or in their community. And for me, I hadn't not been thinking about running for office, although I had done a lot of kind of public policy advocacy work, particularly around behavioral health issues, around homelessness and affordable housing issues. And I had a number of people come to me and encouraging me to run for state office. And I actually had not done that much advocacy at the state level. I'd done it mostly at the local level. And I was like, no, we have to find somebody who's far more qualified than I am to run for office. And more people came to me. And so I started talking with some folks who I knew who were in elected office to see, like, what do you think? Got their advice. And what I realized is that I actually knew a lot of people in elected office because I had gone knocking on their doors advocating. And I knew a lot about a whole range of policy issues because of my advocacy. So that is another reason. And what I find for people to get involved in advocacy, because what I find is my kind of real life experience, doing work in behavioral health, in housing and healthcare generally really equips me well for talking about like the real life impacts of the policy decisions that we make in Olympia. And so I really thought the state could be a better partner and provide better support to my community and communities around the state. And so that's what initially motivated me and what continues to keep me in office.
Probably hook you in. I got hooked in too. So I know we have you until 3 o'clock and you're a busy person. I want to open it again to the audience. Like, what questions do you have for Representative Macri? Again, please enter the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and chat and talk.
Representative Macri, Ben Boyle. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us. I know we have a lot of, especially with the pandemic and the remote session over the last years, that we'll have a lot of people with their first time advocating or speaking with a legislator. What advice would you give them in how to make that first point of contact on like Legislative Impact Day or something? Like how do you start that conversation with them?
Yeah, I think just sort of orienting your legislator to like who you are and why this issue is relevant to you is really important. Like, hi, I'm Nicole. I live in your district, or I work in your district. I go to school in your district. I am here to talk to you about an issue related to physical therapy that's really important to me. And here is why it is important to me, and to share a personal story. I would say particularly physical therapists are really fortunate to be well represented in Olympia. So like all the data and facts and stuff, you don't need to know how a bill becomes a law, although I think you're learning a little bit about that today. I think what you need to do is really own your own expertise and share it. And you have expertise that, Melissa, who's an excellent lobbyist, is never going to have about, those interactions, those provider patient interactions that are really, personal and can share the impact of how public policy can make dramatic difference in individual people's lives. And so that's what I encourage people to talk about. So the things that like I remember in talking with physical therapists about are when people share those stories, like I had a patient come in, they had an injury from a motorcycle accident. I worked with them for months to try to do this. If I would have had this policy on dry needling and able to do this technique that I've already been trained in, I know that we could have reduced the number of sessions, that my patient would be in less pain. I've seen that I've heard that similar stories like that. I've also heard, we've done a lot on prior authorization issues. And I remember stories, they still stick with me, of physical therapists saying like, you know, I spend like 3 hours a day on billing issues or calling these third parties trying to get services authorized for my patients when I could be delivering patient care. And those kind of stories like also really stick with me. So those like really painting a picture for what the work is like is incredibly helpful.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Maya Chin. And so what are some ways to not get overwhelmed by all the change that we want to happen or we want to see?
Yeah, that's a constant challenge for all of us. For me, you know, the thing is, I'll say like, there's so much change I want to see. There's so much frustration with the status quo. And, you know, by design, legislative work is slow and deliberate. And it's almost designed to kill policy ideas rather than see them move forward. And that is, you know, because we have this process of like, these are policies that are going to impact at least, you know, the millions of people who live in our state potentially. And so bringing together these 147 people from all corners of the state to make up the legislature and make sure that that policies are well vetted means that change is slow when it requires law changes. And I think it's really important to celebrate the progress that we make and really understand the significance of such success. And there are many days where I get kind of down about like, why isn't this moving more quickly? Think about this dry needling policy that I have been working so closely with folks on since 2019. I think about the intersection of our opioid crisis and just how many patients have not been able to get their pain addressed through physical therapy and have, you know, turned to physicians for medication to manage pain. And so I feel that pressure of like, why couldn't we have changed this law like 3 years ago? But then I see like we're making progress. Legislative change is slow. And now when I talk to my colleagues in the legislature, first of all, I have many of them reach out to me unsolicited saying, hey, are you sponsoring the dry needling bill? Because pretty much every single legislator has heard from physical therapists in their district about this bill now. And so it really has built momentum. I've had so many legislators reach out to me say, when that bill comes up, can you please send out an email because I really want to co-sponsor that bill. So we have built momentum. So where I was like, measure success of like, did we pass the bill in one session? You can get kind of demoralized, but when you really see the momentum that is built around it and the education of policymakers around the importance of therapies like physical therapy, I feel like we can and should count it as a success. So I think it's just really important to mark those successes in order not to get overwhelmed by all the things we haven't yet accomplished.
Thank you. And we appreciate your passion for dry needling and all the work in Seattle too. I don't suppose you have time for a quick 10-answer question or 10-word answer. What are the priorities for next session, you think?
Well, top of mind still through the pandemic is a healthcare workforce. This has been a challenging time, which is why in part I'm like so excited to be here with many physical therapy students because we need more healthcare professionals across the spectrum of healthcare. So thank you for that. I think we'll also see issues related to housing, cost of living in general, but there's a big push for housing policy. we'll continue to see work push forward on the climate action front as I'm sitting here with all of my windows shut, with my air purifier on. I think climate issues remain top of mind for legislators. So cost of living, climate, healthcare remains top of mind for folks. That includes behavioral health, long-term care. And that's way longer than 10 minutes, but, or 10 words, I'm sorry, but maybe closer to 10 minutes than 10 words.
No, there's a lot of things to think about here in Washington. And yeah, the 200 AQI here, I think, at least in Seattle. Well, thank you again for your time. We appreciate you coming out. I think you want to take a quick social media picture before you leave, okay?
Yeah.
I think Jackie, you're in charge of that.
Got it.
Are we good, Jackie?
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, trying to unmute. Yes, got it. Thank you
Great.
so
Well,
much.
it's wonderful to see you all. Thank you. And thank you for doing this. I hope to see you during session.
Yeah, we'll see Legislative Impact Day, January 26th.
Yeah, awesome. All right, see you then.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so we're thinking of pushing back the break. The break is supposed to be scheduled for 3, but since we took a short one earlier, we're hoping to get into the breakout sessions now, if that's okay, if everybody, then we'll take another 15-minute break at 3:45. So we're gonna go into breakout sessions. So topics will be research, strategy, and getting involved. So you'll spend 15 minutes in each one, and the leaders of each topic are gonna rotate from each room to the next. You guys all get to stay put. So besides Melissa, Ben, Jonathan, and myself, I want to introduce 2 other people. We have Amanda Catigliola, who is our PTA caucus rep and the PTA director on our board of directors, and Robin Schoenfeld, who is a member of our legislative committee and a former chair of the committee, and she did a lot of work with this ballot manipulation bill. So please be ready to use your own devices. There's going to be a lot of tools and resources that we'll talk about, and feel free to talk to us a lot in the breakout rooms as well. So Jackie is going to get that settled, and we'll see you back in the main room at around 3:45.
Critical that, you know, people in those settings, in each of those different settings, or each of those different areas are stepping up and advocating, right? Because again, if we're not participating and we're not advocating, we're not, you know, out in the districts talking to your district representatives or at the chapter meeting, bringing these things to the floor, your association doesn't know. It's impossible for us to know what's going on in each section of each academy and in each different setting. So I think that, yes, advocacy and being an advocate for your particular settings and bringing those things to the forefront is absolutely critical in order for, you know, us to make sure that, you know, everybody is moving along in the same direction in a beneficial way for each member of our association and profession.
Yeah, I think this
I was
highlights
just,
it. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead.
sorry. He asked if I corrected, but there's nothing to correct. I'm Greg, by the way, from Green River. I'm a PTA student. Go Gators. We are, I think, all wondering when we graduate, like getting into the field. I've heard just like talk about how there's been a decline in how PTAs get reimbursed over the years. So that I just wanted to voice that and see what you guys had to say about it. And I thank you, Ben, for talking about that. So yeah.
Can I go ahead and field that a little bit as the PTA representation for state of Washington?
Amanda, yes.
Thank you. Okay, so I got a chance to have some of this discussion in a group chat, and I thought it was so important that it actually gets brought to this conversation now. Yes, so there is advocacy efforts happening currently at the state and national level to fight reimbursement cuts specific to PTAs in all settings. I got a chance to listen to one of the conversations from APTA National, and yes, there are some reimbursement changes for PTAs and just PT in general at home health, acute, all the different settings. Obviously, outpatient orthopedic is highlighted currently, but it doesn't mean that it's not being affected. But yes, APTA, Ben and I are having conversations all the time. I got a chance to talk with Roger Kerr, who is our APTA president, about this issue. This is a very important issue for me as a PTA. I've been practicing for 18 years. The sustainability of us as PTAs for another 50 plus years and ongoing is critical and crucial. It's on the forefront. I am voicing it at every option and event I can, and we are working on it. We are working on patient campaigns and email campaigns and legislation, state and national. Things are going to get done so PTAs will have a place to work today, tomorrow, and for another 50 plus years. PT will be relevant and so will PTAs. And please email me. I'll put my email in the chat. I would love to talk further about this. I could one-on-one conversations, group conversations, because I know PTAs, this is a hard time. There's ebbs and flows in the PTA profession. And this is possibly one of those, but this isn't going to define us. This is a moment, and we are going to move forward and be better and get things changed the more voices we have. So yes, Gregory, I would love to have you as an advocate, and I will help you get you plugged in.
I have
and
a
anybody
question.
else who's willing to do that. Go ahead, Isaiah.
Oh, so I have a question for Ben Boyle here. I have an auditory discrimination disorder, so if I do become a PTA, I'll be in a constant state of clarification with others, confirming with others, so that way no miscommunication occurs. But I just wanted to clarify, did you say, and you know what, I might have misheard you, so correct me if I did, but did you say that there are higher reimbursement rates for PTAs at hospitals than other medical settings?
I think yes, I think the hospitals can negotiate their contracts differently. It's not necessarily PTA specific. I think that they have more power to negotiate with commercial payers for potentially different rates. I think typically, Susan, correct me if I'm wrong, in the hospital setting, but they generally, when they negotiate those contracts, they negotiate it for the whole hospital, physicians and everything included. And then PTs, as a result of them doing others, may have different pay for reimbursement for different CPT codes, not necessarily for PT and PTAs themselves.
Right. And I would also say probably not a lot of PT differences, honestly. And it all depends on what type of hospital system you work in as well. So if you're in a rural health system, it's a little bit different than if you're in one of the big, huge urban systems, or if you're there. But when I look at what our private practices get and what we get, it's not much different.
Yeah.
So
maybe
I think it
the
depends.
contractual write-off is hot, maybe higher in the hospital, but the actual rate is pretty close.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of like whether a hospital gets a higher reimbursement rate than say like a nursing home. I take it, it varies with like each hospital. It varies with each nursing home.
Pretty close. Yeah.
Yeah. I think they, again, without doing a contract law type discussion, I think they're able to negotiate like a higher list price per se, but then it gets written down to something that's written off down to something that's pretty equivalent across the board.
Yeah. And it also depends on your patient population. If you have those insurances, a high number of those insurances that you can negotiate in, you're better off than in being able to do that, versus if you have a high population of Medicare and Medicaid where there is no negotiating at all. So.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
Great questions and answers. know payment's a tricky surface. So let's talk a little bit about dry needling. There's a couple questions here about that. So is there any talk about doing dry needling? This is from Nanbi. Hopefully I said that correctly. Is there any talk about doing dry needling using an ultrasound guided technique to be more accurate? Maybe this will help push this through to fruition quicker. And Catriel also asked a question about the infection and puncture and with dry needling and how those benefits are with the risks.
Yep, I'll take a shot at this since I've been well immersed in this. Yes, again, remember, I don't know if you remember earlier when I said like facts and logic are always at play in these sorts of discussions. The ultrasound guided as well as the EMG discussion or is one that it seems perfectly logical and factual, but it's just not at play. I know one of the things that we highlighted to Representative Cody at one point was, you know, we have EMG, right? We're probably getting more closer to the nerve, deeper to the nerve. You know, probably one of your more higher risk needle insertions. We hook it up to the electricity, and then we hook it up to the computer, and it's okay. We take away the computer, all of a sudden it's not okay. And yeah, you know, that seems pretty dang logical to me, but yeah, it doesn't always play. Facts and logic aren't always the key indicators of success. And then going back to the safety and the risk question, I think that is good. So there's three components that you have to be able to demonstrate pretty definitively if you're going to expand your scope of practice. One of them is the safety component. Second is efficacy, does it work? And three, is it more cost effective? So those are the kind of the three challenges that we have anytime we try to expand our scope of practice. And in relationship to the safety and the infection, say that is very, very minimal in physical therapy or acupuncture. I always kind of point to the White and McPherson studies on this. So there's a lot of question, right? So physical therapists and physicians in Europe are trained at basically a 50-hour standard for dry needling, and then the TCM practitioners have their standard. And White and McPherson's were studies conducted by the NHS there, and they basically took 30,000 consecutive patients treated by PTs at a 50-hour standard and 30,000 consecutive patients treated by TCMs at their standard, and looked at, you know, minor adverse events, significant adverse events, severe adverse events. And what they found was that the overall instances of any adverse events were exactly the same between the groups, right? There were almost severe ones were non-existent. The minor ones, things like that include things like slight bleeding, bruising, soreness, feelings of euphoria afterwards were all exactly the same between those huge groups. So I think that overall you can say needle in the hand of a physical therapist versus in the hand of an acupuncturist, they're equivalent. There's equivalent levels of safety. I would make a second argument, because that we're only trying to treat kind of neuromusculoskeletal conditions and organs, and not organ systems like acupuncturists do, that there's less incentive for us to be hanging out in high risk areas. And if you look at incidents of worldwide of severe adverse events, they do happen. Significant adverse events, I think of the last study I looked at, of the 320 severe adverse event reported as case studies and whatnot across the world, only 4 of them were PT. And most of them, so I think that we have a pretty solid track record of, with our training, kind of knowing where we should be and shouldn't be. Again, I think it comes down to, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. I think PT, our profession, is blessed to have a multiple of techniques and skill sets and that we can utilize for a given situation, and you know, really kind of balance that risk reward in a positive fashion for the patient.
Great, thank you, Ben. Next question is, has there been any discussion regarding telehealth PT?
think, is there a question further for that? Because we have had an approval for telehealth a couple of years ago, and payment parity as of was it a year or 2 years ago?
Right. Yeah. Actually, it was just before. I think it was the 19th
Just
session.
before, yeah, just before.
Yeah.
And that bill has been in effect the whole time, and we are fortunate to have had that passed before. So if there's further question on that, but telehealth PT is legal and has payment parity in the state of Washington.
Yeah, I think from a federal affairs perspective right now, I think the thing that we're kind of lobbying is set to expire with the public health emergency. Medicare, at least in their proposed rule, elected not to include physical therapy, occupational therapy providers as providers of telehealth to Medicaid beneficiaries. So that's one of those things where Jonathan was talking about earlier. We paying attention to those proposed rules, taking advantages of those comment periods, right? We've had some success getting significant changes through between the proposed and the final rules. So that's super important to kind of pay attention to those things, because as it stands right now, telehealth for Medicare stands to expire 165 days after the public health emergency ends. So.
All right, and then Jackie and Amanda posted some resources there for everyone to take a look at too. Okay, next question from Aubrey. What are other items or bills besides dry needling and the other ones discussed in this camp that are being worked towards? And are there any more plans for the future? I think I have to answer this one. Yes. So I don't know if anyone was at the chapter meeting this last weekend. So during that meeting, there is some voting that's sent out. So it was a hybrid meeting this year, so we can vote online. So there's some bylaws to vote on. So if you all remember, please check your email and vote by Friday, I believe. So besides dry needling, we were trying to amend, and forgive me if I say this wrong, Melissa, you might have to jump in for this one to explain it.
Yeah,
you got it?
Yep, I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
Right, so there was a motion on the floor that would allow us to pursue legislation that would change who physical therapists can form a corporation with. Current law, it's restricted to PTs and OTs, we have been having conversations with the OT Association about moving both of those professions into a larger list that exists in current law, a list of about 15 other professions. So opening up the multidisciplinary clinic to include PTs and OTs.
Partners and owners. And I think that's really the big thing is the being able to partner with other practice groups really does give us a bigger seat at the table, essentially, right? Now we're true players and decision makers, and especially as integrated medicine takes hold across the state and the country, having those opportunities for PTs and PTAs to be able to become owners and partners in those type of practices, I think is a huge both for public awareness and stakeholder awareness, but also potentially tackle some of the upward mobility issues that we're faced with, right? We have stagnating pay and higher student debt, and opening up our opportunities to be upwardly mobile, I think, is important for our membership.
Yes, so if you can, please vote and try to approve that bylaw for us so we can get started working on that this legislative session. So usually we work on 1 to 2 issues per year, and that's enough time that you can get at a time too. So I think the more plans for the future, I think it's a question I want to open up to the whole panel, like what are the biggest issues you see us facing with APTA Washington, or what issues do you think we should prioritize? Assuming we're done with the dry needling.
I want to hear from I have my ideas, but I want to hear from the rest of you. Yeah.
Well, something provocative that was in the House of Delegates probably 10 years ago was that as our profession changes to where most people that have a PT license have a doctorate of PT, we would change our licensure designation to be, instead of you getting a PT license, it would be a doctor of PT license. And there was a move for kind of all the states to try to do that once we hit a threshold where like 70 or 80% of licensed therapists had a doctorate, similar to doctor of pharmacy, doctor of chiropractic. So there's other examples where they've done that. So that was something, I don't know where it's going to be very contentious. I'm sure we'll have everybody coming out of the woodwork on that one, maybe, or maybe not.
I know also, I forget what year it was that Wisconsin got imaging passed, that there was a bill for allowing physical therapists to refer patients for imaging. And that was not that long ago, but that's definitely something that's going to be on the horizon here, I think, as well. But yes, not with any.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yay. Hello, this is Eric Moen from the road. One of the things that I think as we march bravely forward, back to the telehealth option, I think we need to defend our rights for telehealth, because I think that's as we look forward in technology, the ability for us to have, or for our patients to have access to us remotely is a very important thing. And for that to be a diminished or less valuable interaction by payment is a bit of a shame. I think we have the onus to help define the rules of what is the appropriate engagement with regards to telehealth, but I think that that's an important thing. And then also, when we take a look at ourselves as primary practitioners, we're not primary practitioners like we prescribe medicines and things like that, although there's talk about prescriptive anti-inflammatories. But when we talk about practicing at our highest level within the practice of physical therapy, I really strongly believe that we're the entry point for basic musculoskeletal, basic neurological identification. And then it's our ultimate responsibility to push these people on to things like orthopedic, rheumatological, geriatric, neurological rehabilitation type referrals. So I think that would be, I don't know how you'd word that legislatively, but I think that the continued push and support for that language would be very important.
I think we should have DME prescription rights. Oh my God. Why do we need a prescription to give someone a walker? Who knows better than us?
That did come up in the House of Delegates, and that got, as a first entry point, first test run on prescriptive rights to show that we know how to utilize it, which we all know we do, but also, to kind of make it a little bit more accepting of provider groups. And I'm sure the physicians would not mind at all giving that away. Yeah,
definitely. So I would like to, and this isn't really a state, but it could be a state, figure out a way that we can get paid more appropriately, or looking at things a little differently for managing folks. So the chronic neuromuscular folks, chronic pediatric disorder, where right now, in peds, once they're 21, it's really, really tough to kind of be a part of that person's life on a regular basis, enough to really say, oh, you need a tune-up now, or oh, now you need to go to the orthopedic person because your hips are trash, or and so to be able to do that, because there's a number of us that are, you know, really working towards managing that population versus just treating that population. And so right now you don't get a lot of payment for consultation that way. So
that's a great idea. A great way to potentially expand our influence for sure, is kind of opening up the 99 series codes to physical therapy practice to help evaluate and manage patient population. And I know that Roger talked about that weekend, as that was really the next step for us, is kind of our ability to try to demonstrate our ability to affect public health or large populations. And we're really not going to be able to do that unless we have the ability, as Suzanne said, to manage these large subsets or these large populations within the public.
Yeah, I feel like there's always things to add, always things that are going to come up, definitely. Some unexpected ones too.
And the thing is that I think people don't also realize is how much work you do. The committee, Melissa, tracking bills during the legislative session. And so those are the things, even though these couple of things get talked about as this is our agenda, the agenda is always consistent with patient care and everything that's going on in the healthcare committees. And so Melissa's tracking all of the bills during the entire session and keeping us as stakeholders and keeping us informed also. And it's our job to weigh in when it needs to be weighed in and do work when something comes up and you don't know what's going to come up in any session. And so really there's a lot more work that goes on during session than people realize, just because you get so much airtime for the current bills that we have out there.
Not just in healthcare. So all the education stuff, all the higher education stuff. Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Okay, we got time for one last question. And again, hopefully I said your name right, Catriel. How would you manage the significantly increased workload of DME paperwork if that became the responsibility of PT?
I guess I would argue that PTs are already doing all of the paperwork for free. So only we're spending so much time trying to get it signed, like a wheelchair form. Like PTs are spending hours and hours on that. Susan,
yep.
What would you add?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was going to say. So when our occupational therapist does wheelchair evals, she actually writes up the justification, does the paperwork, makes sure the doctor signs it. The doctor has to write it certain ways. She writes it for the doctor, so the doctor writes it certain ways. So it wouldn't be much different. Once again, if there was a way to use codes to get at that time that it takes to do that documentation, that would be kind of what is necessary.
I know that some of the physicians I work with, when they have to fill out paperwork, like you want a handicap permit or disabled driving permit, or you want this, they make the patient come in and do it during an appointment, which is not typically in our billing structure, but we have to work something out for that.
Yep.
I completely agree. We need to stop giving away our time and volunteering so much of our professional knowledge. We need to be reimbursed for our professional knowledge base. So yes.
I think it highlights just the complexity of the systems that we work in, though, because like some of these issues are Medicare, which is federal. So some of the payment stuff, that's a federal issue. Some of the stuff we have control over within the state, like our prior authorization bill. Some of the stuff is like our codes that we actually use are actually owned by the American Medical Association. So it's very complicated and figuring out like where to actually tackle these issues is challenging. So that's part of why everything takes so long.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming in and for your time. I appreciate all of our panelists, and everyone thank our panelists for us, for giving up an hour of their afternoon, because that was some really insightful words.
This is Jackie. Could we take another screenshot picture real quick with you guys here while I'm thinking of it? Okay. Okay. Okay, everybody smile or frown, whatever you want to do.
Oh my.
Just a second. We're okay. Just a sec.
I have one last really quick comment is that that was alluded to in some of the conversations that we've had, but that some of these legislative issues take years to accomplish. And so part of it is perseverance, and it's over several different legislative chairs often, because the issues are complex, and the negotiations take a long time, and sometimes it's an issue of waiting till a specific legislator retires. We have two really significant issues that were resolved when the person retired. So I just, especially for the students that are here, that we need to really take the long view on some of these issues and hang in there. And I think that Melissa has been very helpful in reminding us that we need to take the long view when something doesn't pass and we're all frustrated by it. And it's kind of like, well, one little step at a time. So thank you, Melissa. And thank you for all the panelists that have, because I know everybody that I see on this panel has gone through things over multiple years of time and stuck with it and stuck with the advocacy part of that.
I can imagine what a politician is thinking before he or she retires. Oh, you want to pass that bill? Not on my watch.
We've been told that.
Oh, so I guess that's why we have to wait till you retire. Okay, makes sense. All right.
That's why we all stick together and why we all get to know each other for a long period of time. But yeah, again, it's hard not to have these issues weigh on you, and this is why it's nice to have a whole support group to do it all with. Again, thank you, panelists, again for your time, and for Eric. I heard you're in a car in South Dakota.
Better late than never.
Getting a great sunrise, sunset.
Oh.
So wow,
Enjoy the view.
See it.
Okay, Jackie, I think we're waiting for your link.
Okay.
So if you can, there's a poll of link on the screen. If you want to type in just what you feel like you gained from today, what are your thoughts? Feel free to put it in the box, in the chat. But it was nice talking with you all, learning from you all too, and just again hearing the student perspective too, because we need your voices too. So I think this has been helpful for all of us here today. Thank you to our presenters, Ben, Melissa, who else is still here, Robin, Jonathan, for all of your time and all your efforts for today. So we'll post a list of all the resources we just discussed today on our website, and we plan to email a link to all of you. And Jackie, I believe, is posting the screenshot. And yay, I see the links coming in. a lot of time, effort, collaboration, a lot of processes. Okay, so I know Jackie will have all of this. Again, thank you all for your time. So again, mark your calendars for Thursday, January 26th for Legislative Impact Day in Olympia. We hope to see you all there. We hope to see you all in person. And thank you for spending your afternoon with all of us. So enjoy the rest of your night.
Thanks, Janae.